Hi everybody, welcome to today's webinar. We're going to talk about DIY or do-it-yourself professional development. A little bit about me before we get started, in case you're not familiar with our firm. I'm the founder and director of Relicura, and I've been in the cultural heritage, museum and archives fields for more than 15 years. In addition to being a professional in that industry, I am also a business owner, consultant, author, and speaker, and a people first advocate. Some housekeeping before we begin. A link to this recording and any of the links that we happen to share throughout the webinar will be gathered and sent to you 24 hours from this webinar premiering. A reminder that this session is pre-recorded so that I can deliver the maximum amount of information to you and so that we can do any sort of follow-up questions and resource sharing in the chat box. Speaking of which, if you're watching the premiere live and if you happen to have a Google or YouTube account to log into, we are using the YouTube platform. And so if you're logged in, you can go ahead and feel free to share your questions, examples, resources, etc. in that chat box as we continue on together in this webinar. And because it is the YouTube platform, it's going to come with all of the basic YouTube video player options in terms of being able to dictate the quality of the video that you're watching, as well as the size, depending upon your device, in addition to the closed captioning that it can provide. And then finally, just please remember to respect the content being shared as my intellectual property, and it is subject to copyright. Okay, table of contents for us for today. We'll do a grounding of this particular topic and all of its lovely context to kick us off for our reality. We're going to get into then the benefits of development, and this is for us to ponder, but also could be a very helpful slide to use when you advocate to your boss. We'll go through some of the areas of development to consider, some traditional, some not as traditional. We'll get into types of development and where to find those types of development opportunities. I'll then share some prompts and recommendations for you to consider, especially and specifically around whether you're a early career, mid-career, or later in your career professional. We'll talk briefly about how to balance it, things to consider as you're balancing seeking professional development in the context and in the midst of working your part-time or full-time or more than full-time job, and of course all of our personal, family, friends, health commitments as well. And then we got some good questions in for today's webinar, so I'll cover a few of those that we received at the end, and we'll of course have some more time together to do Q&A through the chat as well. Okay, getting into it, the reality. For the, galleries, libraries, archives, museums, the GLAM fields together tend to have similar challenges and opportunities. And this is one more area where we sort of have some shared challenges and opportunities. Those being low to no mentorship available, especially at our home organizations. Many of our libraries, archives, museums, cultural heritage centers, and organizations are smaller. They tend to be more moderately budget sized, very hyperlocal, and tend to have specialty staff, but maybe only one of each specialty, for example. And so in those particular circumstances, it can be very hard to have a mentor, let alone a mentor that happens to share your particular field or area of specialty. So already we're sort of at a disadvantage by the nature of the institutions we work in, just because there is not a whole lot of populace in our local area or at our home institution to tap in for mentorship. Additionally, there is limited opportunities for mentorship in the field. So our fields are a healthy size, but they are also just naturally smaller given the very niche specialties that we have. And so while the field sizes are numbering for many of us in the thousands, if not tens of thousands, maybe even more than that in the more general museum field, it still could mean limited opportunities for you to find a mentor and receive some mentorship. Additionally, there are different development opportunity options that are sometimes hard for us to think outside of the box on. There are, of course, the more traditional education for collections care and management, for example, but there are, of course, adjacency in fields that could help inform or improve our work. And we'll get into those as part of our session today. There's little to no organizational resources for individual cultivation for many of us. Again, going back to that sort of modest budget size that many of our institutions have. If there are dollars for professional development, it tends to not be a lot, or it tends to be like either a lottery or application system in place where not everybody can have access to development every year. So it can be very limited in resources in terms of finances from your home institution to support your development. And then courses in needed areas are always available. And in this particular case, courses in needed subject areas. And as much as being able to take offerings online has helped to expand our access to different subject areas and education and development in those areas, because again, there's just not a lot of us as a field, and certainly not a lot of us that go on to be educators or mentors. It can mean that there's sort of slim pickings in terms of content being available. So that's all to say that there is opportunity out there, but it does require some sleuthing and some research to figure out where those opportunities are. And part of our session today will help cover that. Okay, benefits of development. So this is something for you to think about, especially as you consider what are some of the reasons why you're interested in seeking professional development. But this can also be helpful for you if you need to do some self-advocacy, either to your boss or your board, in terms of why professional development can be incredibly beneficial, not just to you as a professional, but to your department and to your larger organization. So some of the bullet points to keep in mind are: professional development helps to keep our knowledge and our minds fresh, especially in the areas where we're dealing with ethics, diversity, equity, accessibility, and inclusion initiatives, or DEAI, and the evolving best practices in the field. And this is true across the GLAM fields. While there is a lot of our best practice, which comes out of decades, if not a few centuries of our work, there are still developing and evolving areas, for example, like collection policy development, that while they may have been, collection policies have been in play for decades now, if not centuries for a couple of our museums, it is certainly a hot topic again now as we look to evolving those collection development policies to better demonstrate the ethics that we believe are important in our field. So definitely one of the top benefits there is that while our fields may have existed for quite a while, and while we may feel or think that things aren't changing that quickly or drastically, the fact is there are several areas in our fields where have been drastic changes just by the nature of the current events we've all lived through these last few years. All right, next point: keeps us up to date on current or near future challenges and opportunities. Now, this could be technology advancing, and so we always want to make sure we're staying up to date on the latest digitization equipment availability, the latest collection management system functionality, things like that that can help our jobs from a technical level, but also wanting to make sure that we are being kept up to date on the challenges and opportunities available on like a programmatic level or in a more qualitative manner versus a more technical or quantitative manner. Our next benefit point is it helps to inform and improve our daily work. So regardless of which sort of professional development or continuing education you may be seeking, it does help to develop you as a person, and then of course helps to give you tools and knowledge to make your job easier in the day-to-day work. And then finally, it gives us a stronger competitive edge within the job market. So This particular bullet point you may not want to mention to your boss as you're doing some self-advocacy, but the truth is, the more aware we are of current topics, of current challenges and trends, and the more we're up to date with evolving practices and the processes that we follow, the better and more conversant we can be when we're speaking with potential interview groups, and the more able we will be to jump into a new job where some of these challenges or opportunities may be such at a critical stage that they're one of the first things you're having to do, while also getting used to a new job opportunity and a new job organization. So getting and maintaining professional development as you work through your career will be beneficial in multiple regards, but especially so, and one for you to keep in mind, is your competitive edge in the market. Okay, areas of development to consider. So I think this is an important slide because for us, it can be very easy to think like, oh, okay, digital, data, collections like hands-on preservation or restoration. Those can be some of the first things that come to mind that we may have learned a little bit in graduate school, are always things that tend to be changing or that we could learn more on. But, or in addition to, there are several other areas that are adjacent to our work that, depending on the size of organization that you're in, depending on you may be in one job now, but wanting to move to a different job later on in your career, depending on what your career goals are or what the opportunities are in your particular organization or in your particular geographic location, there can be different areas for us to consider as we sort of move through our career trajectory and navigating where we want to be next. So, in addition to traditional stuff, I encourage you to think about moving beyond like the foundational things that we learned in grad school or would have learned in grad school had we gone and subsequently got 20 plus years of experience in. We can start thinking about if we're heading into management. So, for example, if you're early career moving into mid career or later in career, project management, yes, very helpful. And in fact, I would argue very helpful regardless of where you are in your career, but it gets increasingly important as you move in because your responsibility is presumably increasing, but also the people management aspect. This is perhaps the weakest area for so many of us in the CLAM industry. If you are someone who is navigating into your mid to later career and you are hoping for opportunities or your career to evolve into a position where you're not just managing collections, you're managing people, seeking out professional development in that area can be not only very beneficial for you and your future staff members, but also to your organization. Additionally, thinking about grant writing, fundraising, really anything that helps to bring in financial resources or in-kind resources in that regard, because everything we do costs money at the end of the day. And so being able to bring in monetary resources at any point in your career is quite a benefit and is usually valued fairly highly, especially because so many of us are in the nonprofit or more into like government agency type fields versus private or corporation organizations. Then, of course, thinking about topics that have come more into focus and have increased in importance these last few years, that is seeking out cultural competency. So seeking out competency in cultures that are not your own and yet may be represented in your collection. So seeking competency so that there can be respectful and accurate and authentic engagement and stewardship of the items as well as the relationship with that cultural community. The DEAI, diversity, equity, accessibility, and inclusion initiatives, what those mean, the policies that can be influenced or representative, the trauma-informed work, and this is particularly important for those that work on collections that, especially archival collections that have documentation of trauma that has happened at a point in time. And regardless of when that point in time is, the work that we do when we're working on those collections that contain trauma, it can deliver secondhand trauma. And so having trauma informed um, education and development in that area can be helpful for us as the people working with those collections. It can also be helpful for us as we work with the communities that have been harmed, and helps to inform our respectful engagement both with the content as well as the people. And of course, anti-racism. So as we're working through our collections and as we're working through institutions that have been around for so long that they're needing evolution in this area, excuse me, seeking out how to be anti-racist both as a person but also in practice as part of a larger cultural institution can be incredibly important, both as a person involved in a community but also a person who is charged with responsibility of certain cultural collections. So there are several areas where you can see that the subject matter is not necessarily like, oh, you're in museums. Obviously, you're going to now take a course on fundraising or in anti-racism. But each of these areas that aren't necessarily directly part of our subject matter, they are still so critically important and inform our daily work if we're able to receive that continuing education and development. So definitely something to ponder as you think about professional development and the areas you may want to invest your time and money into. And of course, while it would be lovely to do all of these areas of development, and perhaps throughout your career, you will be able to do all of them, chances are you'll need to pick one, maybe two areas as you get started in your professional development journey. Okay, so we talked about areas like subject matter of development that we can do. Now, what are the different types of development? So in the GLAM sector, we have several different flavors of professional development and the way it's being offered. There's, of course, the most traditional track that continuing education toward a degree. So these are for either like newer professionals or potential newer professionals, or those who may have entered the field through experience and now want to seek a degree. So any sort of formal education to receive perhaps like a master's or a PhD, depending on your field, getting that official education from a college or university. The next, perhaps like second most formal, are certifications. And so certifications are typically little less work, a little less formal than like a master's degree. However, there are usually, like, you take multiple classes, there's usually a specific track or topic that are covered throughout those multiple classes. And then at the end of those classes, you may have a test for testing for competency. And at the end, you get a certification saying, in addition to potentially your master's degree, you now also have certification in digital asset management or records management, for example. So certifications are a piece of more formalized education. And we can find them in a lot of topics like project management, records management, in the archivist field through the Society of American Archivists, for example. There are two different certification tracks you can take. For the museum field, it's a little hit or miss in terms of certifications being offered. I tend to see more classes, a little bit more less formal in terms of like a certificate. So it will depend on your particular field and also sort of what you're interested in, but certification sort of hangs out right underneath the formal education and degree. Workshops and ad hoc classes are sort of on the same plane in terms of it's going to be several hours typically of a class that's focused on a particular subject. So maybe it's a workshop on grants. And so it's like 4 hours of workshop time to learn some basics of grant writing. or perhaps it's a grant writing class but offered through like a local community college, for example. So it tends to be more one-time thing and maybe a few hours, but on a specific topic. Next up, we have webinars or seminars. So webinars if it's online or on demand, seminars if it happens to be in person. Tends to be more lecture style. You are at a webinar currently, and it will focus on one topic, and typically it's only going to be for about an hour, maybe even less than, for a webinar or seminar. So a little, further down, less formal, tends to be on one particular topic and for a fairly focused and short amount of time. Then we have professional conferences and conference sessions. So as we travel, whether physically or virtually, to our local professional organizations or national professional organizations, in addition to some of the workshops or continuing education classes they may have at like the beginning of the conference, you then of course have the whole official duration of the conference where you have those professional sessions that are educational and do share current best practices, current projects, etc. And so while somewhat formal, is in a fairly, compared to university, fairly informal, more focused, shorter time frame, etc. And then finally, the concept of coaching. And this one will typically only come into play if you are someone who's moving, you're in later career, and you're perhaps moving into leadership or management, where having a professional coach, leadership coach, managerial coach, something to that effect, to help give you skills, education, coaching in ways that you never learned in grad school. And even if you did, that was maybe 20, maybe even 30 years ago. So coaching on a very individual level, it tends to be multi-session. And in our particular field, tends to be very focused in that like leadership management track. All right, where to find development opportunities. So we talked about the types. This is where you find them. More formalized education, maybe a couple ad hoc classes. You're going to find those in graduate schools. For some of the graduate schools, you have to be enrolled to take a class, but there are some graduate schools out there where they're more flexible and you can just audit or augment with one class here and there. We can consider schools or professional organizations. Those tend to offer classes, workshops, trainings, and certifications. One of the professional organization examples was the Society of American Archivists, offering a couple different tracks for certifications. Pretty much every one of the national organizations in the GLAM industry offers workshops and trainings if they don't offer certifications. We have professional conferences that will be with the national and more regional organizations that we're members of. There will be online educational platforms and YouTube. So in addition to any online webinars, etc., that may be hosted by a school or professional organization, you also have people like myself who are offering educational webinars. We're using the YouTube platform, but there are also more formalized educational platforms that offer similar sort of on-demand content. So in addition to everything else. And then for coaching, if that is something that is being sought, you would have to individually find professional coaches in the particular field and area that you are interested in. All right, prompts to consider. So as you're thinking about professional development, especially if you are new and entering into the concept of professional development, or you're moving mid to later career and it's kind of like a what next question mark, here are some things to think about. So where are you at in your career? In our conversation today, we're talking about early career, so just starting, or maybe a couple years in. Mid-career, which for many of our industry, many of our fields tends to be if you've been in the field longer than 10 years. So mid-career can be like 10 years into 20 to 30 years, depending. And as you move into later career, depending on how early you entered the field, later career could be like the 15 years plus, but it really is also dependent upon Are you moving into perhaps like department management to museum management? Depends on the size of your organization in terms of if that's moving into later career. So some different qualifiers in terms of both length, but also like what responsibility you're moving into. Next, what perceived gaps exist in your knowledge and experience that could improve your everyday work? So again, thinking about the list of topics that we covered earlier in this webinar, both the traditional types of topics that you would expect for the GLAM industry, and then of course the more adjacent topics that help to inform and support our work. The next prompt, what perceived gaps in your knowledge and experience could lead to the next step in your career? So one of the main benefits and the main vehicles for us growing in our career is professional development. With that in mind, having a picture of where you're headed, having a sense of what sort of topics you want to evolve your expertise into is going to help inform then what sort of classes or certifications you may be seeking out. Our next prompt, what types of collections do you enjoy working with? So for us, part of the expertise we have is in the doing, the managing, the preserving. And the other part of the expertise we have is what the collections cover. So whether that is a person, place, or thing, whether that is different cultural communities, different subject matter, we tend to be or attempt to be masters of knowledge of the physicality or the digital nature of the collections and the stewardship of that, as well as the topical content or the intellectual content that is being contained and conveyed by those collections. Next prompt, what type of collection work do you enjoy doing? So there is quite a lot of different work and facets to collections care, collections management, and collections access. There's physical components to each of those as well as digital, and quite a bit of leading from point A to point B in terms of bringing in the collection, processing, cataloging, publishing online, creating exhibits, whatever your particular area is in within the industry. What about that work do you enjoy doing, or that you would like to do more of, or that you'd like to be more qualified to do? Will help to inform the areas that would have the most value for you in terms of development. And then finally, which types of professional development could make you more competitive in the market? So while I definitely still encourage you to think about what are the things that you enjoy and what are the things that you would want to seek out in terms of knowledge and experience, I also recommend thinking about the reality of what is the competitiveness in your current geographic region, if you're hoping to stay in the geographic region you're currently in, as well as what's the expertise that your particular field is looking for. For many organizations in your area, you may find they're all having somewhat similar challenges or areas of opportunity, and that may help be indicative to you in terms of what sort of areas will help give you a competitive edge to bring those skills and knowledge back to those organizations. So thinking about what the organizations seem to need as well, or what the field seems to need as well, will help you stand out in terms of having that type of expertise and having that type of professional development in your curriculum vitae. All right, so things to keep in mind as we navigate our way through this and as you think about different professional development opportunities is one, we're already in a pretty niche field. So we're already specialists in a few different things in a few different ways. And so for us, it may not be necessarily becoming even more narrowed in terms of our expertise, but instead perhaps broadening our areas of development into topics like project management or people management, as an example. Also keep in mind there are a lot of official professional development tracks for our industry. While there are certainly a few certifications or tracks that you could follow to add to your already existing education and experience. We just don't have a lot. And so it's not quite as easy for us to be like, oh, let me just check the 20 different certifications that we have available. There's not a definitive list, nor do I think we have that many. Next, there are opportunities available locally. So it may be easiest to, in your initial Google searching, to find the national opportunities for classes, webinars, conferences, and maybe even certifications. However, there's also a lot of great content being produced at the state level as well as like the regional levels for archives and museums, especially. And so, getting a membership to those areas and taking a look at what sort of education or professional development opportunities they tend to offer, especially in this sort of evolving post-ish COVID world, we have now all adapted to Zoom and virtual meetings and webinars. And so many of our state and regional organizations have done such a great job of being able to provide this type of professional development content somewhat regularly. And then finally, there can be scholarships or stipends available at the regional organizations. For example, I'm a member of the Northwest Archivists, and there are two different educational grants. One is to help like bring in a Society of American Archivists course teacher to the regional conferences to host one of the classes there. And then there's a second one where it's essentially a scholarship stipend to apply to you taking a class anywhere and helping to cover some of that educational cost. So check out what resources may be available as well, especially if your current home institution does not have much of a budget, if at all, for your professional development. All right, recommendations per where you are in your career. For early career people, I recommend that you focus on the professional relationship or the professional network a little bit more than the actual development piece, especially if you've just come out of getting your master's or getting your PhD. Like, you've just received a lot of very up-to-date information on our field. What is more important right now is for you to get membership to professional organizations, to integrate into your community of professionals, get a sense for what the hot topics are, get a sense for what the shared challenges and opportunities are for our particular field and region, because that will probably be more helpful to you for these next like 3 to 5 years. So that's not to say don't do any professional development. I'm saying think of that as in do a professional development in your relationships and in your network. And then, of course, like if you want to take a class or watch a webinar, like all of the power to you, like go forth and enjoy. But I think at this point in your career, make sure you're also paying attention to some of your relationships. For mid-career people, I recommend the continuing education or cutting edge areas may be of interest and perhaps the most help to you. So seeking out education or development in different processes that have evolved since you perhaps went to grad school, different best practices that have evolved or changed, and especially around how we're currently using technology for our collections and any other sort of new and evolving content or things around policy and ethics that not only can help your job currently, but especially as you're eyeing what later career looks like for you, if that looks like it's leadership, if that looks like it's management, in both formal or informal ways, having those skills with you ahead of time will help make that transition much easier and will also help make you more competitive as you're considered for those roles. And then for the later career people, this is really about you as an individual at this point. You've got a few years left ahead of you. And so, depending on what that looks like, for example, if you are already in or hope to be in a leadership or managerial role, Many of you already are if you've reached it to later in career stage. And anything that can help you as an individual finish out that job, finish out your career, which does tend to be more about growing the people in your care, in your charge, as well as helping to grow and advance your area, either of specialty or area of collections, your programs within that area before you leave. So this is really about what are some of the last items that are under your care and cultivation that professional development could help support and make it of ease for you to accomplish. All right, how to balance it. So, of course, many of us are working, it could be part time, full time, more than full time, and resources are scarce at the institutional level and for a lot of us at the individual and family levels. So, here's some prompts and things to think about. Can you perform professional development during work time? So we're already working very hard, and for many of us, we are overworking. So can we carve out some time already in work mode to do this type of work? Um, for professional development, keep in mind that yes, it does benefit you personally, but it is equally important, if not more so, that it's benefiting you in your workplace and the organization itself. So that's my argument for why professional development should happen during work time. Next prompt, can part of your work be offset or paused while in development? So thinking about your typical workload balance, which again, for many of you, you're wearing many hats. It's usually way more than one full-time position. Can some of that work be put down? Can some of it be paused, especially if you're taking something that is a class or a certification where it's multiple classes and that would take up more than just a couple hours of your time? Is there a budget stipend or local grant that can help subsidize the cost? So as much as possible, if your organization can't pay for it, which should be the first stop and first ask, taking a look at what other sort of like maybe there's city grants or maybe there's a local professional organization that offers grants. There is money out there, so see what money is available to you. Then, is it online, available on demand, or offered locally? Those you can tend to fit in a little bit more easily around your life. Those typically mean that you don't need to have any sort of travel costs. You don't need to be away from family more than the duration of the webinar, for example. And so, therefore, it's a little easier for you to fit into your work and your life. And another last prompt to consider is it offered in addition to a conference? So is there perhaps a national conference that you're already going to where if you arrive a day earlier, you can take a full day class on X? And so sometimes being able to wrap in that professional development or education with a conference you're already attending makes it a little bit easier for either your organization or yourself to help cover in terms of cost. Is it worth it? So the resources that we have to consider when we're talking about seeking professional development is the cost of accessing that development. Sometimes the content can be free, such as this webinar. Other times there's a cost to it. So is the cost worth it? Then of course there is our time, the time it takes to attend whichever type of the development activity it is. And for some of those, it can be quite brief, but for others, as we know, it can be quite a bit of a commitment as you're seeking certification, for example. And then thinking about the benefits and thinking about the short and long-term benefits and thinking about that as you're in your current job, thinking about the benefits as you are looking at job prospects or when you do get to a point where you're entering back into the job market, or when you are at a point to consider a job pivot. So maybe museums and archives, you're feeling a bit burnt out and you want to pivot your existing skills into an adjacent field. So for example, database management is an area that exists in not just museums and archives. So, are there different areas of development you can do knowing that you would like to do some type of job or field pivot? So, as we think of all of this and as you go through it, you don't have to have all of the answers right away. It certainly helps if you have an inkling of what some of those answers are, because that can help you narrow down what topic you are going into or what type of development or education you're seeking. But regardless, it is never a mistake to invest in yourself. And so, a lot of the education and the experiences that we gain, even if we leave the field, much of them, the lessons can be applied and help us further on in whatever that next part of our career looks like. So don't let not knowing all the answers stop you from getting any kind of development. And of course, remember that you can take it with you. So, this investment that's happening in yourself, you seeking continuing guidance, you seeking that further development of yourself as a professional, yes, it definitely helps your home organization, but you can take it with you and it helps any future organization you work at. So, the benefit multiplier there is actually uh, really impressive. So, knowing that you can take it with you can hopefully help alleviate some of the commitment anxiety. All right, we'll talk about resources briefly, and then we've got a few questions we'll talk about together. Resources. So, for the museum folks, we've got the American Alliance of Museums, the national organization here in the States. They have both on demand programs on their website as well as professional development programs. I've not looked too deeply into either of these. However, AAM is a little infamous on like everything being behind a paywall. So, depending on your level of membership, you may or may not have access to the programs, but something to at least check out and see what is available and then sort of weigh if it is worth the membership. There's another great association, the Association of Registrars and Collections Specialists. They have workshops, there's content at their conferences, they also do webinars. So, quite a bit of programs available there that if there is a cost, it's like a fairly low, like usually very accessible kind of cost structure. And then, if you're an archivist and in the archivist community, Society of American Archivists here in the States has a continuing education area on their website. They do have two different certification tracks as well as classes you can take in general, in addition to a myriad of ad hoc webinars and, of course, the professional conferences that they do and workshops that they offer around that time as well. All right, so contact information if you need it. And we are going to get into our first few questions. Our first question is, when applying to jobs, is attending things like free webinars and classes considered quote unquote real professional development? There are some really good free classes out there, but the options for free or low cost resources are definitely more limited. Yes, absolutely. That is the truth. So, for us, and as mentioned a little earlier in this webinar, there's not actually a lot out there for us in terms of professional development opportunities. And especially so in terms of like if you're trying to seek something formal, um, there's not much beyond the official like master's or PhD degree. And depending on which of the CLAM fields you're in, there are not actually a lot of certifications either. So, with that in mind, my experience has been as long as the source of who is giving that content is reputable, and that being like is a fellow professional in your community, and is recognized as a fellow professional in your community, as long as it is by a reputable source, then it is considered real. Using myself as an example, Yes, we do these free webinars for the community, and it's offered by myself, no official endorsements, and certainly available for free, no cost structure or anything. But I also do, as a professional, offer workshops and classes through regional organizations, and those are typically fee structured on the person who's hosting it to help fund the particular class or workshop. So me as a professional, I can be offering these directly to the community, or I can be also be offering these officially endorsed and hosted by a regional organization or government agency. So that's a very long answer to say, as long as it's a fellow professional and that person is offering the content, it's good. It doesn't matter if it's free or not. Um, However, if you do feel like you need something official, such as a degree or certification, then that's where the more formal classes come in. So if you are someone who is perhaps mid-career, but you jumped in feet first, and so you have the experience, but not necessarily the degree, and you're finding you need a degree to be competitive in the job market, then I think maybe that's an instance where it makes sense to get the formal education. So play around with that depending on what your background is and where your goals are. But the TLDR of it is that as long as it's a reputable source, then it's considered legit and basically no further questions. Next question. When I'm applying to jobs, will it hurt my chances if I haven't taken many paid classes or gone to any conferences because I can't afford it right now? Yes, so this is a great question. As someone who's been and been a part of multiple interviewing of candidate kind of rounds and doing the assessment of the applications, the typical evaluation will be to review your overall education, depending on the role you are in and the specialty needed, the area of specialty if applicable. So for example, if you're an archivist, you don't necessarily need like a subject specific degree because you could be in any kind of archives. And it would be nearly impossible for you to see the future, to see what sort of subject matter you would need a degree in. Whereas if you're a curator, then yes, you may need some museum studies stuff, but you're going to need like a subject matter expertise. Anyway, so overall education, a specialty if you need it, and then where you hold professional membership. So for the early career folks, or for anybody who financial resources is scarce and maybe your home organization does not reimburse your professional organization memberships, or excuse me, doesn't support you going to those conferences, etc., at least having membership or being participatory in a professional group is typically seen good enough, especially for early career. It does tend to depend if you're going for a university position. There's the publishing of papers, as well as like how many presentations have you given, conferences you've gone to, etc. That's like a whole very other special area of hiring. But as long as you don't fall into that camp, it's really like, are you at least participatory in professional organizations? That indicates that you are keeping up to date on the latest trends in the field, that you are able to be conversant and speak to what are the current challenges and opportunities. So having that professional membership, while it would be great if you could go to conferences, like it's not necessary in terms of the people who are interviewing you. So let me make sure I hit all my points. Early career professionals, understandable. Yes, okay. So yeah, if you're early career professional, understandable if you've not had opportunity for like future education or development, especially because you just got out of a lot of education. And then for the mid-career or later career, this will depend on the type of job being sought. But usually, again, the default is, are you part of professional membership? Okay, great. You don't necessarily have to go to the annual conferences. maybe you attend the monthly workshops instead. There's pretty much an assumption that as long as you are a member, you are getting some sort of content and information, and you can take advantage of the development or not. All right, last prepared question. How do I highlight professional development while applying for jobs, especially if it's not an official course or certification? Yes. So a couple of answers to this one. Depending on your application, sometimes you are limited to a 2-page resume, in which case maybe highlighting a few brief, like if you took a couple classes or a couple workshops, if they are very applicable to the job you are going after, then I would have carve out like a little education and development section for like maybe a couple bullet points to highlight those. And that's if you're constrained to 2 pages. If you are allowed to submit a curriculum vitae, which tends to be pages long, depending on how long you've been in the field, and again, whether you're doing like a university application, because in addition to your experience, there's like, what have you written? What have you presented? What professional organizations are you a member of? Like, there's a lot more sections that you can take advantage of to demonstrate your professional memberships, to demonstrate the conferences and classes and etc. that you've attended. In which case, great, you've got plenty of space to go and include that in. And then finally, think about usually when we apply for jobs, a cover letter is usually always required. And so, again, if the classes, workshops, like just the few that are very applicable to the job you're going for, I recommend highlighting those in your cover letter to call attention to them. So if you feel that the professional development you've done is particularly germane or particularly impressive for the application you're doing, then by all means, definitely weave it into that cover letter to call attention to it. So those are my recommendations in those areas. All right, I think we have a few minutes left, so we'll wrap up some of the Q&A happening in the chat, but otherwise, thank you so much. We'll have one more webinar before the end of the year with you all. I hope you are well, and we'll see you next month. Thanks.